o'clock news, so I have no idea what they ran. But later, one of the guys that came in called me.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I don't want to introduce them if they're not here.
So it's Autumn and
Olivia.
Are here.
Okay,
Caitlin couldn't make it. I told Carolyn this morning.
Okay.
And Devin, these two are.
Well, they were kind of iffy anyway. I'm going to go see if this one from the Mayor's Youth Commission showed up. But you got it under control there, so.
I don't know if it'll pick them up well or not. And if it doesn't, it's tough to do a story with because you can only really go one by living person. So I
Yep, yep, I've got 7 o'clock. Can you hear me?
No.
And I did make it.
We're down right now to our fight. I don't think we can.
Is it? Good evening? Okay. Good evening. Now it's on. Okay, if everyone could be seated, please, and we'll begin. I'm Dagna Simmons, and I'm a co-chair of the League of Women Voters of Sioux City, and I will be serving as a moderator for this evening's Woodbury County Candidates Election Forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization whose membership is open to citizens over the age of 16, male or female. We do not endorse any candidates or any political parties. We do, however, work to educate ourselves and the public on issues affecting our citizens and government. This is why we are committed to hosting candidate forums like this one tonight. This forum is being hosted by the League of Women Voters of Sioux City in partnership with Western Iowa Tech Community College. We would like to thank the WIT staff and students for making the necessary arrangements for tonight's event. I would like to acknowledge Steve Warnstead for the physical setup arrangements and Chris Mansfield for audio-visual arrangements. We will also like to thank them for arranging for the YouTube live streaming. Cable One is not able to rebroadcast our event this evening because of some technical difficulties. So it will only be available on the YouTube live streaming. And now I would like our panelists to stand as I introduce them. Our guest panelists tonight are Teresa Weaver-Basie of the League of Women Voters of Sioux City, Woody Gottberg, President of the Greater Sioux City Press Club, Mary Hartnett from K-WIT Public Radio. Okay. We appreciate them giving up their time to be with us. Timers for this evening are students from North High School and part of the debate team. Autumn Coleman, if you could stand up and there. And Olivia Jackson. And helping them is Corey Cantrell. On behalf of the citizens of Woodbury County, I want to thank our candidates for their willingness to run for public office. I will now name the candidates in alphabetical order by seat and district if applicable. Please wave as I say your name. For the County Board of Supervisors, District 2, we have Flora Lee and Jeremy Taylor. County Board of Supervisors, District 4, it's Carter Smith and Matthew Ung. County Treasurer, Michael Clayton and Bruce Garby. There is a third candidate for County Treasurer, Michael Headed, but he was unable to attend this evening because of prior commitments. Okay. The format for this evening is as follows. I will pose an initial question to the candidates relative to their qualifications and will allow them 60-second response time. The panelists will then pose their questions. Each panelist will pose a question to just one candidate, and after the candidate answers, I will call upon the next panelist to pose a question to the next candidate. The candidates will have a 60-second maximum response time. The timers will show a sign to the candidates when 30 seconds remain and when their time has expired. So there's the 30-second sign, and then there's the stop, time's up sign. Okay? Can everybody see that okay? Okay. I will then announce the 60 seconds are up and proceed to the next panelist. During the final 10 to 15 minutes of the panelist portion of the forum, The candidates will have an opportunity to answer any question that has been asked of another candidate or to expand on a previous answer. And then the candidates feel free to take any notes on questions posed to other candidates during the forum. After approximately 45 or 50 minutes, we'll take a short break and collect questions posed by the audience. Audience members are encouraged to write questions on the note cards that they were provided as they came in. During the break, the greeters and the League of Women Voter members will collect the note cards. After approximately a 10-minute break, I will reconvene our forum and pose as many of the questions submitted by the audience as possible. I will ask one question to a candidate and then another to the next candidate until I've used the time allotted for this segment. During the last 10 minutes of this final segment, candidates will be given an opportunity to give a maximum 90-second summation. I would like to remind everyone here to turn off your cell phones and pagers. Thank you. We will now pose our introductory question and ask that each candidate respond within the allotted 60 seconds. The question is, please state your reasons and qualifications for running for a seat on Woodbury County government. And we will start at this end of the table with Flora Lee.
Good evening.
And you have 60 seconds, just to remind you.
I decided to run for this County Board of Supervisor because I believe we need to start looking at working together with not only the Board of Supervisors, the department heads, but also with other governmental entities. I also believe that I am most qualified for this seat because I have proven leadership. I have always been a lifelong Sioux-Citian. I have shown you as a community that I have leadership skills, communication skills, and I work on solving problems. I served on the Sioux City Community School Board for 12 years as the director, vice president, and president, and served on the financial committees, also the building facility committees. I was also very involved in the community in passing the local option sales tax for infrastructure for public schools. I believe also that I have the educational background and the proven leadership in many areas, and I want to address the issues of fiscal responsibility, being a good steward of your tax dollars.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Taylor.
Well, thank you very much. I first of all want to thank the League of Women Voters, the participants in Western Iowa Tech. There's going to be a choice and a real difference laid out by our perspectives tonight, but I'm appreciative of the opportunity to do so. And I hope to once again earn the trust of county voters for the next 4 years. By trade, I'm an energy specialist for the Sioux City Schools and help to manage their energy spend and a budget of nearly $2 million. I've overseen a budget of $6.2 billion at the state level and helped to turn the tide as far as our fiscal responsibility at the state level. And then I believe I have a unique perspective as an Iowa Army National Guard officer working with our Veterans Affairs. I'm also a father of 6 and a husband of 1, and so I know about time management and organization. I hope to, in this next hour or two, really lay out the fiscal responsibility that we've engaged in as a board, the transparency and accessibility, as well as the way that we put people first rather than politics. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight's event in the rain, and to the League of Women Voters and Western Iowa Tech for hosting. My reason for running for the County Board of Supervisors is having a strong held belief that we need to have people in leadership that have lived experience and have a strong connection with the community and the work that's being done at both the county, the local, and the national level. My interest in public and mental health is what brought me to the table, and advocacy in prevention is kind of where my background sits. As far as qualifications, I was born and raised on a small family-owned farm and was involved with 4-H over the years, and then from there went on to go to college and work in the business and data field before switching over into public health and healthcare. My combination of nonprofit and lived experience along with the business background prior to that, I think give me an interesting eye set when it comes to the table.
Thank you. Mr. Ung.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming out on this beautiful evening. Or staying in, I should say, which is easy. I live a balanced life, and I have a unique perspective, being the son of a Laotian refugee to this country and a husband to an immigrant from Honduras. My wife, Naylan, and I have been married for over 7 years, and one of the greatest honors of my life was being allowed by a district court judge to give a welcome address at her ceremony for U.S. citizenship, along with dozens of other immigrants. We have a beautiful daughter named Charlotte. She is ridiculously cute and a gift of God at this time in my life. I've earned 3 master's degrees or certifications in business administration, in theology, and in scuba diving. I have over 10 years experience in healthcare administration. I'm currently the office manager for the Foot and Ankle Clinic, a medical practice with 2 doctors and 5 support staff. In addition to executive experience, I'm also a court-appointed special advocate for the abused and neglected children in our community. But much of what I've done for the county board has actually been low-key background improvements, such as modernizing the agenda format, making committee information more transparent, or instituting annual performance reviews of department heads who may not have had one for several years. One of my qualifications, I've kept my word.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Clayton.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this and appreciate everybody that came out tonight. My qualifications probably go back 18 years to when I was hired by Bob Knoller, the former treasurer, to work in the motor vehicle department as the deputy there. 10 years there, and Bob decided he wanted to retire, so I thought, well, why not? I'm not ready to retire, and I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy working with the people that I work with, so I decided to run for county treasurer. And in 2010, I was elected to my first term. I'm currently serving my 2nd term, and I want to continue with that. We have lots of work to do yet, and we'll discuss that as the evening goes on. But I enjoy what I do, and I have lots of more plans to put on the table for us to progress and to move the county forward in the treasurer's office.
Thank you. Mr. Garby.
Thank you all for inviting me out here tonight, and thank the League of Women Voters. I presently am retired. I retired from the Sioux City Assessor's Office after 25.5 years. I worked with the Treasurer's Office over the number of years that I was there, hand in hand. I feel the need for separating motor vehicle and the Treasurer's Office apart. As you all know, the Treasurer's Office was moved out of the Woodbury County Courthouse, which is now up with motor vehicle. There's nowhere for the handicapped to make accessibility for any questions they may have, and I would like to change that. There's a number of changes that need to be made and looked at. There's a language barrier. We need bilingual in that office. There's just a number of things that go on that need to be addressed, and I would like to be the one to address those few options that I just mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you. I will now ask that our panelists begin their questioning, and we'll begin with Ms. Weaver-Basie to ask Ms. Lee.
Mrs. Lee, can you name 3 priority items you believe the board should work on next year? What would your #1 priority be for the upcoming year, and why?
I think we need to look at the budget. We need to look at infrastructure and the mental health issues. And when I say the budget, we need to look at the mental health issues and the infrastructure. We need to look at it simultaneously, because we need to, the budget is our roadmap so that it will show us where we're going, where we can spend, where we cannot spend, and how we can make good decisions and provide quality services to the constituents of Woodbury County. So my top priority would be looking at the budget, making sure we had the funds, and making sure we could live within our means, and that we can continue to provide quality service within the county.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Gottberg, a question for Mr. Taylor.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone, and thanks again to all of you for running for office. There's about 3 dozen races in the tri-state area that are unopposed, so it's tough to get good people to run, so thanks again for taking the time and effort to run for office. Jeremy, the courthouse, it's been a big year celebrating its centennial. You had a big role in that. With improvements to the building, there have been window replacements, elevators. What do you think needs to be done to help modernize the historic building, and what work is there? What would you like to see done to improve the courthouse beyond where it's at after 100 years?
Sure, thank you for the question. Well, we have what I believe is the finest building in the state of Iowa, and it's valued at between $80 and $100 million. And we work very closely with our state folks as well as our local preservation committee. We have modernized that building, and we won a national award for doing so. In fact, all of our buildings by retrofitting it with LED lighting and being energy efficient, redoing all the steam traps. But we have a building that really has some serious needs. One of which is the terracotta, which is an architectural and artistic feature, really needs a lot of repair and work. So what we've set out to do is to have not only a 1, but a 5, 10, 15-year plan for that building. So the terracotta is an integral part. That's not only the decorative, but also on the outer facade. There are also some structural issues with that building that we're going to have to invest long-term in. And so I hope to work with our building services superintendent as well as with our preservationist committee to really have a long-term goal for those building projects and to be able to fund them in such a way that we don't do emergency repairs any longer. And I believe that that was part and parcel of the past board. We've been able to get a control
Thank you.
and to have a long-term plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Hartnett, your question would be for Mr. Smith.
Okay. Well, as we all know, Woodbury County has split from the Sioux Rivers Mental Health and Disability Services to eventually go into the Rolling Hills region. Carter, could you tell me, do you think that the county could have stayed with Sioux Rivers, and why?
I think when we look at the transition from Sioux Rivers over into Rolling Hills and where it started at and where we're at now, there's a lot of things along the way that impacted where we're at. And so when we look at if we could switch that and if we could have stayed versus leaving, I think it's a complicated answer. I think when you have leadership issues, you address them at the leadership level instead of putting the entire system in jeopardy as a result of failed leadership. So I would say that we need to take a look at the drawing table to see what services we're losing and who will lose services as we make this move to see if that's really what's in the best interest for the citizens of the county.
Thank you. Ms. Weaver-Basie, your question will be for Mr. Ung.
Mr. Ung, to stay with mental health for another moment, what would you do to address mental health issues within the county system? For example, unstable teenagers, mentally challenged individuals who possibly can't read, people in health crisis, etc.
Well, I think overall, and this is going to be a point of disagreement, obviously, but I think that we have addressed some of those issues by this move. Now, you brought up crisis situations. One illustration of what we've been dealing with as a county board has been that Woodbury County asked for funding for the 23-hour observation center at the crisis center. Woodbury County's rationale was that this was going to be a core service with new legislation. Sioux Rivers unfortunately voted that down. Woodbury County protested, and later on they decided to approve it. So these are just things where we talk about leadership issues, and sometimes we have to stay focused on the issues at hand and not the personalities. And I think that at the end of the day, what we really did was we listened to our largest mental health provider, Sioux Mental Health, and our largest hospital, Unity Point Health, that backed our move. They did so. They waded into a political issue that was very contentious, and the fact that they were willing to do that, I think, speaks volumes when we look at what the county's done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gottberg, your question will be for Mr. Clayton.
All right, thanks. Mike, you are in your second term. What would you like to see change or improve if you're elected to a third term? Anything in particular that you would change as treasurer if you were elected to another term?
We've got a major project in the works right now, Woody, and that is to convert the county software from multiple pieces of software to one single system. That will take place over the next year. That's a major project, and it's going to require all hands on deck, and it's going to be stressful, and it's going to be Extremely painful in the short run. It'll be very beneficial in the long term because right now we have two different systems for financials. We have one in the auditor's office, one in the treasurer's office. Those two systems don't talk to each other. So what we have to do is we have to make, through spreadsheets, we have to be able to balance those two systems so we can keep our books straight between the auditors and the treasurer's office. That's one of the major projects we've got going on. Cross-training is always an ongoing need. Half of the staff in my office has been there less than 5 years, and half of that has been there less than 2 years. So we've got constant training going on, and that's an ongoing thing that we need to continue. With the new system coming in, there'll be even accelerated training. So,
Thank you. Mrs. Hartnett, your question will be for Mr. Garby.
Mr. Garby, you spent 25 years, I believe, as a county assessor. Is that correct?
I worked for the Sioux City Assessor's Office.
The Sioux City Assessor's Office.
I was an appraiser.
Okay. What did you learn from that that's going to help you if you become the treasurer?
Well, over the years, we had to deal with the treasurer's office. There's a number of things that are involved with the treasurer's office. You've got the special assessments, you've got tax abatements, you've got tax suspensions. You've got the tax sales, the property tax sales that are somehow acquired by the county, that they'll sell those on the tax deed. I'm not sure that I'm saying that properly, but
that's okay. Sounds good.
There was a number of things through the years. There was times we worked back and forth with special land splits or whatever that might be happened. There's just a number of things. I dealt with some tax issues. I was schooled on some tax issues. Although we assessed properties, we didn't tax them, so but over the years we were sent to schools learning the tax issues.
Okay, thank you. In order so that we don't have the same panelists ask the same candidate, we're going to change our order just a little bit on the panelists. So Mr. Gottberg, your question will be for Mrs. Lee.
All right, thank you. Flora, when you announced your campaign, you spoke about returning the focus to the needs of our citizens in this race. What needs in particular?
I think we need to return to looking at the needs of the mental health services, and also looking in the rural area. There's a couple areas. We need to look at the roads, the infrastructure, the roads, the gravel roads, and getting those up to par, because those folks in the rural community are really concerned about the lack of quality gravel that's being used on the roads. And also, I think also public safety, we need to look at, we have screening in the courthouse, but what about Trosper Hoyt? That is a building that there is no real security there, even though you may have law enforcement close by. There's no real security there, and you still have juvenile court services. You have DHS there. So maybe we need to look at providing public safety also there. And I think we need to ask communities, what is it that you need, instead of always directing them to as what they need. And the economic development in some of our rural areas is very necessary.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mrs. Hartnett, your question will be for Mr. Taylor.
Okay. You say the board has done a lot to cut wasteful spending. Could you tell us a few of the things the board has done?
Absolutely. Let me know when I run out of time. So we combined a lot of full-time equivalent positions, juvenile detention and the assistant director, human resources and the assistant director. We saved over $68,000 in the first year on energy alone. We closed a building, $1.2 million. That old county home called Prairie Hills, we did a long-term facility studies plan, and $1.2 million was going to be spent in a decade's time on energy and wasteful maintenance for what? A weight room and a kitchen for the law enforcement center. We were able to close that building, move the kitchen to the law enforcement center, and build a very small footprint for the jail staff and the sheriff's personnel. Those are just some of the ways that we've been able to also look at a couple of unnecessary positions in juvenile detention. At the recommendation of the juvenile detention director, as well as look at other efficiencies and ways that we could be more efficient with our tax dollars.
Thank you. Ms. Weaver-Basie, your question will be for Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith, what can be done to help further development in our small towns?
When we look at development within our smaller communities outside of Sioux City, we really have to look at what we're doing with infrastructure as a whole, what we're doing to maintain our rural roads, and then also increase broadband access, and what types of grants are out there to help do that, and how we do systemic evaluations to make sure as we spend our money, they are improvements that are strategic in their benefit to the local communities, so that we can help facilitate the growth of business in our local communities, and for those folks that would like to live in a smaller community but commute to the county seat, make that transition easier for them and less of a safety issue.
Thank you. Mr. Gottberg, your question will be for Mr. Ong.
Right. Thanks. Matthew, it's no secret, and it's very common knowledge, the tax levy's gone down at least 4 years in a row, which I think residents are happy about. But despite that, property taxes keep going up. There were more people that protested their tax evaluations in the city and the county than any time in recent memory this last year. What, if anything, can the county do to try to resolve that? It's great the levy goes down, but property taxes are still going up. So how do you, what other ways possibly could that be resolved?
And that's the greatest challenge that we face, Woody, is being responsive to the taxpayers as far as the rate, and also being responsive to the services that they require. You've heard services that are needed. You've heard more money that's needed. At the same time, you've heard questions asked of how to cut expenses. So it is notable that what the county did was lower the tax rate both in assessment and non-assessment years. Now, one step the county did take was, in a spirit of that cooperation and collaboration, spurred by recommendations from taxpayer watchdog groups, was to request a combination with the city assessor. Our county assessor does a great job and is very successful at blocking some of those state-imposed increases. But as for what we can continue to do, I think it's just to leverage our funding. The county doesn't have the economic development funding that the city does. And so if we can leverage our funding, whether it's through comprehensive plans, whether it's through strategic hires, I think that as long as we're providing improved services, that if there's a growth in the tax base, people know that's where the income is coming from.
Thank you. Mrs. Hartnett, your question will be for Mr. Clayton.
Hey, my question was about security. You say you have 19 employees, is that correct? They work in 3 buildings?
Correct.
And at the courthouse, you have that one entry in the metal detector. Do you think that, say at Trosper Hoyt, do you need that kind of a setup as well?
Well, I really only have 2 buildings now. I have the Trosper Hoyt building, and then we have the Anthem Little Courthouse in Anthem. Do we need it? Of course we do need security. Can we afford it? That's up to my supervisor friends here to make that decision. I don't feel unsafe where we're at now. I didn't feel unsafe in the courthouse. The security is fine. I don't have a problem with that. I go through it at least twice a day when I go to the courthouse to make my daily runs. And if we had it in the Trosper Hoyt building, unfortunately, the way that building is designed, it would be much more costly to secure that building as opposed to just the courthouse. Would I be opposed to it? No, I wouldn't be opposed to it. Am I going to demand it? Not necessarily. I haven't had anybody in my office fear for their lives or even express a desire that we should push for it. So I do realize on 2nd floor we have judges and courtrooms up there. So if they want it, then I would say let's do it.
Thank you. Ms. Weaver-Basie, your question will be for Mr. Garvey.
Mr. Garvey, do you foresee any more changes in either the physical offices or the automation of tax and financial processes?
There's always room for change. Financial there's a bookkeeper that kind of takes care of everything, and if there's any issues, from what I've learned over the years, there is a computer department in the courthouse that puts things together and works hand in hand with the different offices to provide whatever you might need as far as the combination for any paper. I guess I'm kind of lost for words, but as far as being able to put the two computer systems together, typically it's written by the treasurer's or the computer's office.
Thank you. We'll change the order, we'll change on the panelists again one more time. Mrs. Hartnett, your question will be for Mrs. Lee.
Flora, you have said before, and I know we've talked a little bit about switching from Sioux Rivers to Rolling Hills, and you have said that you thought maybe there was a leadership issue, that the dealings with Sioux Rivers weren't done as well as they could be. Could you expand on that?
Well, from what I see, is that I do think there has been a leadership issue on both sides. I believe there's been conflict, and that one side or the other does not get what they want, so it's kind of like, let's take our toys and go home. And when we take our toys and go home, then who benefits from that? And not the citizens, because it's not about the leadership, those people sitting at the table. They have health insurance, they have access to physicians and psychiatrists and medication. And so I think what happened is that because of the conflict, we are going to lose a great deal of services in Woodbury County. I think our people are not going to get the quality of care that they have once received. And so I think it is about the leadership. I think we're now going to be a big fish in with lots of a big pond, a smaller pond, a big pond, but still we're the big fish, but we're still not going to come out on top. We are going to get less bang for our buck.
Thank you. Mrs. Weaver-Basie, your question will be for Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Taylor, what responsibility does the Board of Supervisors bear in regulating large animal confinements in unincorporated areas within Woodbury County?
Well, currently they don't regulate those. We have gone through a planning and zoning process in which people look for building permits, and so that is our role. Now, we do have a responsibility as far as land conservation and stewardship, and working with the NCRS and looking at voluntary watersheds and things along that nature. We did weigh in trying to advocate a balanced approach for both soil conservation and the concern of some of our rural residents regarding hog confinements, but we are not a regulatory arm. That's something that belongs to the DNR, and so we try to be good stewards of the land and try to be good neighbors.
Thank you. Mr. Gottberg, your question will be for Mr. Smith.
Right, thanks. The county's budget exceeds $50 million annually, and that's a figure virtually anyone that runs for office has no experience in dealing with. Tell me about your financial experience as far as what would qualify you to handle big budget items if you're elected as supervisor.
So during the day, I work with a federally qualified health center. Right now, with our current numbers, our trajectory looks like we'll probably see about 28,000 patients this year. So we deal with a multi-million-dollar budget. Within the office that I work in with prevention and at-risk individuals, we deal with several $100,000 in budgets that work on a rotating grant basis. So maintaining a monthly and annual budget around several different grants for large amounts that are due at different times and the different reporting aspects that are required is an interesting viewpoint to bring to the table, because within that large $50 million plus budget, you have a lot of different moving aspects that you need to take into account when we're making decisions, and how those changes that we make in one area will impact other areas of the budget. So I would say that experience, and then my experience in outsourcing prior to that, would give me some knowledge when it comes to working through the budget and making sure that needs are being met while being fiscally responsible.
Thank you. Mrs. Hartnett, your question will be for Mr. Ong.
Matthew, I wanted to ask you the same question that I asked Ms. Lee about whether or not you could have stayed with Sioux Rivers and whether it was a leadership issue on either side.
Well, I'd like to say, in regards to that issue, that it's not a new situation. Woodbury County has dealt with this for the last 4 years. All of the supervisors on that board have had their issues with Sioux Rivers. Part of that is the culture of large and small counties. That's obviously not going to change overall. But another part of it is just our media scrutiny and the effectiveness that we need to portray for the taxpayers. Now, I'm actually glad that the Journal came out with that front page story detailing how much legal costs the county had. First, this whole thing started 4 years ago, and I did personally turn to our county's attorney's office until they deferred. Second, it completely destroys the main argument that Woodbury County made this decision without thinking. Woodbury County's moves were nothing if not informed by legal counsel, and they were done in the best interests of our taxpayers, and again, that's why we listen to our largest mental health provider.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Weaver-Basie, your question will be for Mr. Clayton.
Mr. Clayton, can you identify ways to improve customer service and still meet budget goals?
Certainly, we can always improve customer service. A lot of that comes through training. And most of that is in-house training. We don't have it in our budget to hire any outside consultants or anything like that to come in and train our people, but a lot of it's just common sense. We have staff meetings at least once a month to help our staff understand what their responsibilities are. They can ask questions of us, ask us, you know, how they should handle things, how we would handle things. Those are the types of things that can improve customer service. We need to do more. I need to do more in probably getting out and informing people of what is available, especially in the online realm. We have so many services online that they don't even need to leave the comfort of their home. They can do business with us 24/7.
Thank you. Mr. Gottberg, your question will be for Mr. Garvey.
Bruce, in your opening statement, you talked about separating motor vehicles from the treasurer's office, so I'll bite on that. Why and what would be the advantage of doing that?
Well, for one, they lost the professionalism of the treasurer's office. There's nobody there to, for the people that, the taxpayer to come in, and if they got any questions whatsoever, there's nobody there that they can actually go and sit somewhere with them or take them where they need to maybe have a little private time. There's no place for them. If there's somebody that needs some help with tax suspension for whatever reason, if there's nobody there that can answer those questions for them, and they need somebody there that can answer those. The treasurer's office started in the courthouse and it disappeared out of the courthouse. I'd like to get back to what the treasurer's office originally was originated for, how many years ago.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Mrs. Weaver-Basie, and your question will be for Ms. Lee.
Mrs. Lee, if elected, would you support hiring a full-time county administrator with a goal of improving and streamlining county government? Why or why not?
Well, that's something that I've never really thought about, but I think it's something that we could look at, but we need to also look at what would the responsibilities of that administrator be, because I do think it's somewhat like a city manager or a superintendent's position, because you know, the supervisors should be focusing on policy also, and also managing the budget, but we're getting, I think the current supervisors get into the day-to-day management of the courthouse and the county issues, and they begin to micromanage those issues. So I think, you know, sometimes we have to allow department heads to do what they need to do rather than take on that responsibility. But I would like to look at it, Administrator, because I know that's something that has come up before in the past. But at this point in time, because of the financial situation of Woodbury County, I would say no, I would not hire one at this point in time. But I would work closely with the department heads at this point in time.
Thank you. Mr. Gottberg, your question will be for Mr. Taylor.
Thanks. About a year ago, Siouxland paramedics threw a curveball at the county and the city by dropping off from EMS service. In the almost 1 year since that challenge has been undertaken by the county, are we adequately staffing EMS, and do we have enough ambulances and staff ready, especially if there's a rural medical emergency?
Absolutely, Woody, and I appreciate the question. We were able to hire 2 3/4 full-time equivalents and have countywide paramedic coverage for the first time in the history of Woodbury County. Now, how did we do that? We did it without raising taxes. We did it with looking at other positions at that time that we could consolidate through retirement and attrition. And I want to say this, our volunteer fire and rescue are some of the finest in the state of Iowa, if not the country. I look back about 40 years ago, Flight 232, as I was putting together a presentation for fellow chaplains, and what did I see? Cushing Fire and Rescue. They had come all the way from that side of the county to be at Flight 232. I'm on my way home from guard drill, and I'm in Holstein, Iowa, outside of our county, and who do I see? Cushing Fire and Rescue, and in the last moments of a young lady's life who had been hit by a semi. So not only do we have the absolutely finest volunteers in our fire and rescue and emergency services, but we've also been able to add 2 3/4 paramedics for the first time in the history of our county. So we are none the lesser.
Thank you. Mrs. Hartnett, your question will be for Mr. Smith.
Carter, you have experience at working with people who have HIV. You counsel them. You understand how the healthcare world works. What do you think the county needs to do to improve its mental health services? I know we're going into a different region, and that obviously plays into it.
Well, I think when we look at our current mental health situation and some of the struggles that we've had, and then combine that with the leadership issues, we really need to look at how we're utilizing our funds and really getting the most bang for our buck. When we look at peer prevention, it's quite cost effective. So our outreach programs and things that we were seeing, potentially getting funded for, or funding questioned on, are really financially good investments for us in the long run as far as the health of the county. The other thing is I think for our largest mental health provider, let's go ahead and bill Title 10 or Title 19 for services that would, be billable for, versus billing the county for those, so that we can take those funds and spend them in other areas. And that's something that we've been waiting 2 years to do, so maybe we can do that now. So I think those are some things that get some people on the ground with lived experience, and then make some good management decisions where we can really stretch those dollars.
Thank you. Ms. Weaver-Basie, your question will be for Mr. Ong.
Mr. Ung, what responsibility does the Board of Supervisors bear for delivering clean water in our Woodbury County water districts?
Well, that's a bit of a niche question. We do have several drainage districts in Woodbury County, more than other counties do. And part of the challenge there is getting community buy-in. So one of our most attended town hall meetings in Hornick actually was discussions of the territory of a drainage district to ensure water quality issues. And we all came to an agreement of what needed to be done, how it needed to happen, and then we said, well, who's going to take the responsibility away from the board? And a couple people were nominated to sit as trustees that weren't in the room. So this is an issue where the county steps in where it needs to, and it's required by law to be the default manager. But these decisions, I believe, as a proponent of local government, are best made closer to home, so to speak. And that's what the county has tried to do, and it's really helped that we do have those rural outreaches to discuss issues like that.
Thank you. Mr. Gottberg, your question will be for Mr. Clayton.
All right, thanks. Well, Mike, we've heard that possibly you don't have adequate staff to handle motor vehicle. I don't know if there's been complaints or not. Are you adequately staffed, and do you feel the need to have motor vehicles separated from your department?
Right now, I think we're just about at the optimum staffing level. I've got every desk in my office filled when everybody's there. To have more people, I'd have to have a bigger office. To divide motor vehicle and tax, at this point, I'd have to hire at least 2, if not 3 more people to have a separate office to deal in. With the combination of the 2 offices in one, I have almost all of my people cross-trained in tax and motor vehicle. There's never a job sits there that can't be done because nobody knows how to do it because everybody's cross-trained. So for efficiencies and for best customer service, the way we have it right now, in my opinion, is the best. Are there long lines sometimes? Yes, there are. Those can be avoided by coming at different times of the day or the week. So I think we have the best of both worlds right now. Can it get better? Yes, it can.
Thank you. And Mrs. Hartnett, your question would be for Mr. Garby.
Do you think that if you were in the treasurer's office, you could do more to serve, say, the elderly, people with disabilities, and help them with access?
Yes, I do. By separating up some of this, you would give more responsibility to maybe the treasurer side, so that there would be more professionalism, somebody with a little bit more knowledge to be able to relate to these people, and anybody that might be handicapped. I believe it's handicap accessible, but there's always more you can do to help the handicap.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That concludes our part of the panelist questions. We'll now allow each candidate 60 seconds to answer any question that had been asked of another candidate, or to expand on a previous answer. And we'll start on this end with Ms. Lee.
First of all, when we talk about the mental health issues in Woodbury County, although Siouxland Mental Health is our largest provider that the county has been working with, and allegedly Unity Point is the hospital that we're looking at working with, or the county's looking at working with. I think one of the things we have to keep in mind, that we can provide all the therapists that we want, but not everyone will see a therapist every week or every day. We need some community-based services, which is the Core 2 services. And we forget about those community-based services, because many of the people that are homeless and many of the people that are served by Siouxland Mental Health or any other agency that provides mental health services, those folks need help with day-to-day living skills, taking their medications, personal hygiene, getting to doctor appointments, getting to the grocery store. And therapists do not do that. And therapists are not on call 24 hours a day, but it is that community-based worker that is. And we need to look at that.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
I'd like to address the mental health issue, because I didn't get that question. And so I do believe that there were leadership issues. However, there was a part-time CEO that I believe was never properly evaluated in our previous region. We have a full-time CEO. And what has she done so far? She's met with every single provider. She sat down to listen, and she sat down to collaborate. We had 3 Rolling Hills supervisors in our community just yesterday. And those supervisors, the Rolling Hills supervisors, have been in our Crisis and Stabilization Center. They've been in Friendship House. I don't know if everyone at this table has even done so. And so they've rolled up their sleeves. Siouxland Mental Health is our largest provider, 60% of our funding, folks. We have 5,000 clients, 60,000 encounters, and they were the ones who were cut. Under Sioux Rivers, over $500,000 to a Crisis and Stabilization Center during this past year. The spending and the budgets there were not sustainable. They relied on reserve funding. They weren't clear. And a Democrat and 3 Republicans who sat on that board said, this is about services, it's about quality, and it's about people, and that is the exact reason that we're in Rolling Hills.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
I've got 60 seconds, so I'm gonna just let things sit for a few. The CEO of Rolling Hills makes, it'll be about $110,000, I think, after we give her a raise after we join them. She met with one of the providers, with one of our supervisors, to evaluate a provider when there was a conflict of interest. And so I think when we look at transparency and leadership, we need to make sure that we advocate for that transparency and we have the right people at the table. I think with mental health, it's a complex issue, and not everyone's in the right and not everyone's in the wrong. And so when we look at going into reserve funding, are we billing insurance companies that could be billed for services that are being delivered through one of our largest mental health providers? Because we can then take the money that the county's spending to cover those costs and use it on other areas. And did our taxes not go up because of, you know, good transparency, or is it just kind of luck of the draw with how some of the numbers were run? And so those are just questions that sit on my mind.
Thank you. Mr. Ong?
Thank you. I would like to respond to a question posed previously to my opponent regarding how to encourage business in the rural areas. I'd like to note that I agree wholeheartedly with everything you said, Mr. Smith. I've done it. I've done that. I've done it all. Comprehensive plans for all rural communities for the first time since 1970. This is big. You need that to develop community consensus on projects, to apply for grants, and to encourage development along Highway 20. Town hall meetings in the rural areas. I see someone here that has attended many of those and actually given me a tour of the gravel roads. Those weren't done. I was the one that made the motion to have our first one, and since then we've met in every rural community since I've been elected, and we continue to do so. Also, Simcoe dues. The county has subsidized those for rural communities that wish to apprise themselves and avail themselves of their resources as a council of governments. We did all this by forming a Rural Economic Development Committee formed of publishers of local newspapers, mayors, and concerned citizens.
Thank you. Mr. Clayton?
Thank you. Well, I'd like to respond to a few of the things that have been said in the past. My office is handicap accessible. Trosper Hoyt is handicap accessible as any other office. We have a ramp that comes down into our office. We have a sit-down counter so that the person can roll the wheelchair up there, or if they just need to sit down, there's a chair they can sit in. If we have a handicapped employee, there's a place where they can use that workstation. So that's neither here nor there. And like I say, I don't agree with the split between the two offices. I think it's a bad idea. Online services. I work very heavily with the Treasurers Association. We have a great online presence. You can pay your motor vehicle renewal online. You can pay your property taxes online. You can schedule your taxes online. You can pay weekly, monthly, however you want to pay it online. And you can do it 24/7. We always improve that site. We always keep working on that to improve that. And to say my office isn't knowledgeable, I disagree.
Thank you. Mr. Garby?
One of the questions that was directed to Mr. Clayton on security, there is security in that office, but the cameras are pointed on the employees and not on the lobby or the entrance, so I would consider changing that direction. And another thing, there's been a time that I've been in that office, they didn't have an answer for me. They gave me a piece of paper and basically pushed me out the door. If I don't have the answer, I will get the answer. That's how I feel. That's how I worked. I want to work like I'm selling something to these people. I don't want somebody to go away because we didn't have an answer. And if we don't have an answer when they go away, I want a phone number so I can get back to them.
Thank you. This concludes the panelist portion of our forum, and I would like the audience to join me in thanking our panelists, Teresa Weaver-Basie, Woody Gottberg, and Mary Hartnett for their participation in the forum. We will be taking a short break at this time, and audience members are asked to write the questions on the note cards provided and submit them to the members of the League of Women Voters, and we'll just kind of walk around and pick them up, or you can find one of us. And when we return from the break, I will pose as many of the questions as possible in the final segment. At the conclusion of that segment, each of the candidates will be allowed 90 minutes summation. 90 minutes. Oh, I don't want to be here that long. 90 seconds. Okay, thank you. We're going to begin in about 1 minute, so if everyone could take their seats, please. And if you haven't turned a card in with a question, you could bring it down to me. Thank you.
It's only been, what, 7 months?
Okay, our break is concluded, and like I said, if you have a question and haven't handed it in yet, you can just bring it to me. We're going to begin the final portion of the forum, and I'd just like to remind everybody to make sure you turn off your cell phones. We have moved the timers to there so I can see them better. So that's the reason for that move. Now we have quite a few questions here, and we're going to take as many as we can, and then we'll have a 90-second summation at the end of this. Okay, I'll start on this end. Ms. Lee, what would you do to increase county cooperation with ICE?
Well, I think, you know, we need to come to the table. I didn't know that. I know that the Sheriff's Department works with ICE, and you're talking about immigration ICE, am I correct? I want to make sure.
That's what the question says, so I'm assuming.
I know that law enforcement in the tri-state area works with ICE. So, you know, I think we'd leave that up to the Sheriff's Department and take a lead from the Sheriff's Department with that. Because right now, I don't have an answer for that, but I think we need to follow the law, the federal law, the state, and the county laws. So that's how I would, you know, do that. I'd defer to the Sheriff's Department for assistance on that one.
Okay, thank you. I've got a lot of questions here, and I'm just trying to sort through them. Mr. Taylor, do you foresee continuing to levy mental health dollars for Woodbury County?
Yes.
And you want to expand on that?
Sure. So do I see that we'll continue to levy tax dollars for mental health? Absolutely. Nothing would change. We levied tax dollars before. We levy tax dollars now. We'll levy tax dollars in the future, except for one thing. We will actually have the spending authority to meet what is currently being spent. What do I mean by that? I mean that right now, in this fiscal year, Woodbury County is budgeted for well over $4 million. In our previous region, by law, we could only tax and collect for $3.1 million. Well, you're saying, oh, wait a second, how can you be spending over $1 million more than you're taking in? Well, you can only do that in one fashion, through reserves. Problem, when those reserve levels are down and they're gone, there are no more services with those dollars. Rolling Hills will actually allow us the spending authority that we do not have and we currently would not have otherwise had we not moved regions. So we'll actually be able to levy for services that we're trying to maintain instead of cut.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, what have you done to advance the goals of the LGBT community?
Well, I think that from like the county perspective, when we look at that, we really need to make sure that we're creating an inclusive environment, not just for the LGBTQ community, but for all communities as a whole. Minorities, regardless of their legal status, things like that. So as on a personal level, what have I done? Really trying to emphasize the importance of we are stronger together. And when we can see people and accept them for who they are and bring them to the table, it makes for a more diverse community, and we can leverage that diversity to be a leader not only in the community but on the state, local, and national level.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. Mr. Ung, what activities do you engage in to promote racial, religious, and gender equality in Woodbury County?
What specific activities? What
the question says,
clubs?
what activities do you engage in to promote racial, religious, and gender equality in Woodbury County?
Well, I stand up for my faith, and I stand up for myself. When people see that you can do that, they'll see that you can stand up for them. I think it's important to have integrity, to treat everyone with respect. Whether or not you agree or disagree with them, there's no excuse to not treat people with respect. And it's kind of like asking that question in a national sense. You know, this country could be defined as having Christian ideals, and it is in this country that many other religions and viewpoints have the most liberty. And so just my religious and my faith background, my belief that we're all created equal, and a strong sense of personal responsibility. I'm not a fan of identity politics.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Clayton, is there an issue with online services being used by rural constituents? And I'm not sure, but I'm thinking what they're talking about is availability of online services out in the rural areas.
Well, I'm not aware of any specific problem with any online services in rural areas, except possibly if you mean, do we have internet service in the rural areas, and that I'm not sure. I have no control over that. I mean, your internet provider is who they are. If you're having specific problems in the rural area with your internet service, check with your provider. If you're having problems with our service online, give me a call. At the office, it's 279-6498, and I'll see what I can do to figure out what's going on.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Garby, what do you see as the basic duties of the Woodbury County Treasurer's Office?
To make sure that the office functions correctly, to make sure that taxpayers are being taken care of. Motor vehicle needs to be, make sure they're taken care of. Run it as efficient as possible. And if there's anything else that somebody wants to, any criticism that would be there that somebody wants corrected or identified, I would be more than willing to work with anybody that way. If there's any kind of issues out there that are not being taken care of, I would like to be known about that so that it can be addressed. Like I said before, I'll get an answer for something. If they don't have if it's not there, I'll get it.
Thank you. Ms. Lee, considering your history as a member of the school board in the past, what will your approach to tax changes on the Board of Supervisors that has decidedly been one to hold the line or lower taxes?
Would you repeat the?
Yeah. Okay. They're wanting you to consider your history as a member of the school board. And I'm thinking what they're asking here is if you will have the same approach to tax changes as was on the school board, on the Board of Supervisors. And I think what they're saying here is that the current Board of Supervisors has been one to hold the line or lower taxes.
Okay. Yes, when I was on the school board, we worked hard to keep taxes low, and I would continue to do so. But the other thing we have to look at too is that we have to look at each department head and at each department and ask each department, what is it you can live without in this department, so that we can make sure we are adhering to keeping taxes low, but yet providing quality services. We have cut and cut and cut. We are bare bones in the county, and that's evident when we look at the gravel that we purchase and the neglect that we've given to our gravel roads, and also as we look at our mental health services, because we are not taking care of our citizens who are of the age 18 and under as we move into Rolling Hills. So we've got to find a balance on how we're going to do that and provide the quality in doing so.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, this one's kind of a long question. Okay, it goes on to the next page. My children have gone to the ARC summer program for the last 2 years. It's a camp for kids with disabilities, and it has helped my family deal with the high needs of our son with great success. The ARC summer program is on the chopping block now that we are moving to Rolling Hills. Which counties in the new Rolling Hills region have you secured support for the ARC summer program by committing to their financial contribution for this much needed program?
Thank you for the question. I visited the ARC program, and I'm a fan of the ARC program, and I believe that the ARC program is being used by some detractors. To call it on the chopping block is disingenuous, and here's why. Every core service must be funded and be core. House File 2456 said as much. Any core plus or non-core service is subject to review. So what does the Rolling Hills 7-county board do? They ask that those who are core plus or non-core make applications so that they can learn about their program and understand it. I have not gone around to every single one of the other counties, broken an open meetings law, and gained a majority of those counties in order to secure funding. I will say that I believe ARC is an important program and one that I would advocate for and one that I would share my experiences in having witnessed. And so to say it's on the chopping block, as has been done with many other providers to sow fear into them, I think is not right.
Thank you. Mr. Smith. As the Woodbury County Board of Supervisors considers giving $150,000 towards a Sioux City riverfront redevelopment project, how do you influence the choice of the for the project and make sure the project has a benefit to a wide variety of taxpayers in the county? And there was a companion question to this that it was written by somebody else, but it's almost the same thing. Please explain why you do or do not support taking our tax money to give to projects that can and should be undertaken by private enterprises, such as the riverfront development project or the Ag Expo building.
Well, I think it wasn't this week's meeting, but it was last week's meeting where the city came up and was asking for the $150,000 commitment to the riverfront redevelopment project. The riverfront redevelopment project sits along I-29 and the riverfront, and so the majority of people passing through Woodbury County on one of our most traveled thoroughfares will be witness to that. So when we look at the $150,000 investment over a 2-year period of time and the long-term impact that they will have on the entire county, we really need to see if it's a wise investment or not. I think it's something that's worth pursuing. If we can spend over $100,000 in legal fees in 1 year on other issues, we can spend $150,000 over 2 on investments for a multi-million-dollar project that a state grant requires the county buy-in from. So I think it's something that, you know, I'm glad that we're continuing to look at it and see what we'll decide in January for a dollar amount to commit.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ung. How can the county most effectively leverage limited funds when it comes to economic development?
That's a great question because the county has several options it can take in that arena. What we want to do is leverage our limited funds. As I said before, we don't have the budget that the city does for this. So part of that was comprehensive plans for the rural communities, and part of that is the reality that we need to not compete with but complement. So what that means is we want to look at the size and scope of a project, how it applies to all of our citizens, whether it's the redevelopment project, whether it's the reinvestment district, whether it's a grant request for a new water tower for a community. And I think it's important to note that these local matches are important in order to secure these grants. So in doing this, the county had to move away from a private loan program, which did pick winners and losers, in order to go to this comprehensive planning measure. And I think that it's important to note that we may take that for granted now, but the county did take a drastic and I believe a good step in moving towards further leveraging its limited
Thank you. Mr. Clayton, The county has recently purchased new financial software. How would you rate the cost of its effectiveness?
Excuse me, will you repeat that last part?
Sure. How would you rate the cost of its effectiveness?
Well, I can tell you a few things. We'll never know for sure until it's actually implemented and we see where we stand compared to the old systems. Right now, with the dual systems of the auditor's office and the treasurer's office, we have to do dual entry on many of the things that we do. We have to put it in our system and we have to put it in the auditor's system, which is a waste of valuable time and a good place for errors to happen. So right there, I would say we're going to save a ton of money. There are many, many other things that this new software system will do that our old software will not do, that will be time savers, enhancements to the way we do business, and it'll also integrate not only the auditor and treasurer's office, also the city and the county assessor's office, because they're both already on this software system. So countywide will be, as far as payroll all the way to taxes and assessments and everything else, will be on the same system.
Thank you. Mr. Garby, what is your investment strategy for public funds?
Investment strategy. Well, they're typically already, I would think, there's a place for them, and the funding is, however the budget is set up is how the funding is going to operate. That's a tough one. I'm not just sure what they want for an answer on that. I guess the employees is part of that funding issue. Anything to do with motor vehicle, if actually the money should be used for the treasurer's office, because motor vehicles should be a separate entity from the Department of or from the DOT.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Lee, please specify one county program that you are in favor of getting rid of.
You know what, I don't have one at this point in time because I'm not sure of all of the county programs. So at this point in time, I can't give you a definite answer on one I would get rid of because I don't know all of them, so I would really like to look at them before I make that decision. I just don't want to make a knee-jerk decision at this time and be quoted tomorrow morning when I don't have that information.
Okay, okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Taylor, how should the county supervisors deal with charges of discrimination? How should claims be handled, and who is responsible for any legal fees associated as a result? And
Sure.
then they added something else in there that you might understand. It says $73,000 so far.
That's interesting. We had over 100,000 and then now 75, and it's actually 43 if it's related to mental health, but I don't know what's being referenced there. So I believe that the county should always work in a spirit of cooperation, treating everyone with dignity and respect, and making sure that we have proper and necessary oversight. Sometimes the county has to make hard decisions, and as a public body, as is the case, sometimes suits are brought forward. Some of them have some standing, and if they do have standing, depending upon the individual, we will act swiftly and we will act justly. I think that's the right thing to do. I say that as just a human being and as a chaplain, and I think a good manager. So that's how I think we deal. We're ultimately responsible for those, and we're responsible because we want to protect the taxpayer in the end.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, the question is, will you raise taxes under, and if yes, under what circumstances?
Well, after we take an evaluation of the budget and see where we're at with our income and what revenue we have the potential to generate over the next 10 years and where our gaps are, we'll see if we can cut back and, like Flora said, do without to avoid raising taxes. 'Cause I think at the end of the day, everyone, Republican, Independent, Democrat, people that don't vote, all agree none of us want our property taxes to go up. And so if we can avoid doing that and still maintain decent services, I'm all for not raising taxes. However, when it comes to quality of services, there are times where we have to make hard decisions. Where does the cost of raising taxes have a beneficial impact to the quality of services that we're delivering, and where are we going to place that value at?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ung, this one was directed specifically to you. Please explain your stance on guns in the courthouse.
For 2 years, I worked in the courthouse with things as they were. If I wanted to change it, I would have before the state law and the administrative order came out in obvious opposition. The argument that I want guns in the courthouse doesn't hold water. As I've said many times before, I didn't see this as a Second Amendment rights issue. I saw it as a separation of powers issue. Woodbury County stood for local control and forced the Iowa Supreme Court Chief Justice to revise his order to make allowance. And what another supervisor said is true. The judge should have run for the legislature. I believe I remain consistent in upholding my oath to the state law, but the board decided to backtrack and allow the judicial branch to claim areas outside their offices they had never before claimed based on logistical difficulties. The debate on this issue is settled by the board, but in my opinion, allowing judicial overreach when it supports your politics simply guarantees it will come back at some point on an issue with which you disagree. I support what the Iowa Capitol has, which is screening for lawful carry. If it's allowed by the law, I support it.
Thank you. Mr. Clayton, I'm going to ask you the same one I asked Mr. Garby the last time. What is your investment strategy for public funds?
Well, my investment strategy is quite simple. First of all, by Iowa code, we can only invest in certain items, CDs, bonds, that type of thing. I try to keep all of my investments, and I do have all of my investments in Woodbury County, in Woodbury County banks, and the reason for that is Woodbury County banks pay property taxes, so I keep it in the county. It doesn't do much good to invest money here lately, a few folks have noticed, because interest rates are finally coming up, but they're for a long time. They were really in the tank. I was lucky to get 1% on a CD of $1 million. Now, thank God they're starting to rise. We're getting a little over 2% now, but we got a long ways to go before we get back to the heyday of Hallie Sargison, Hallie Sargison, when she was getting 17, 18, 19% interest on her CDs. So, but that's my strategy. We keep it local in local banks, and like I say, we're only allowed to do certain items. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Garby, what type of innovations or action do you think could improve the customer experience with the office while protecting the taxpayer?
Well, the security is a big issue. The cameras could be directed on the lobby, as I stated before. Better signage to designate the difference between the treasurer's office and motor vehicle. I guess there's also a drive up. They have the opportunity to use the drive up if they are concerned about security. That way they'd be basically in their vehicle.
Okay, thank you. Before we start the next round of questions, I do want to read this, and I think it's just addressed to everybody. It's not even a question. So this person wrote, "I am impressed with the quality of our candidates. For those who will not be elected, their ideas might still be used, or they should be used as a resource for the board." So I thought that was nice. Somebody gave a nice compliment. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, whoever it was. Ms. Lee, do you support gun control?
Yes, I do support gun control, and I will also tell you that I have taken a conceal and carry class, and I am a gun owner, but I do not feel that I have had enough instruction to carry the gun out in public, so therefore I do not. So, and I think of other people who may not have that type of instruction either, and so I'm concerned about those folks that may not have the ability to handle a gun with care and respect that weapon the way it needs to be respected. But I also am concerned about folks who are in domestic violence situations, people with mental health issues, people who just get angry sometimes and may have a weapon. And having had a girlfriend who was murdered by her husband at one time because he was able to have a weapon, and he had some mental health issues, and she's not here today, and it's been over 40 years. So yes, I do believe in gun control, but I also believe in people have the right to carry their arms also.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Taylor, why has our largest local mental health provider not been required to bill Medicaid or insurance before county funds?
That's a great question, and I think that goes to what we need to look at as a first opportunity in this new region. In fact, it was brought up by the new region, that very question. We should be billing insurance. We should be billing Medicaid so that county dollars can go further. I think that that's an absolutely valid point. It was not a priority under the previous region to push for that. It should be. If someone's in the school district and they have an income that far surpasses, they have Blue Cross Blue Shield, why should you as county taxpayers be coming in to bail out Blue Cross Blue Shield? Doesn't make any sense, does it? And so I think whoever wrote the question, good question that's being raised. I think it will be in this next year in Rolling Hills starting July 1st of 2019.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, what steps will you take to improve gravel roads without throwing more money at them?
Well, throwing more money at a problem doesn't always fix it. Story of my life. The main thing is that we have to remember you evaluate your rural roads and you just see what your usage looks like, and then from there you make strategic investments based on the foot traffic, the quality of gravel that you're purchasing, and go from there. So the main thing is that we can make those improvements in a fiscally responsible way where it benefits the taxpayers that are making use of those roads.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ung, what are your views on LGBTQ rights?
Well, I think you have to define what you mean by rights. I am a Christian. I'm not ashamed of that. I have an uncompromising faith. I live in a relativistic world, and I realize that some of those answers may not always be what people want to hear, especially the person who probably asked that question. But as I said before, we're all human beings. We're all created. And I believe that it's important for us to simply treat each other with dignity and respect, and not advance our agenda through judicial overreach or violence or intimidation. I think that a lot of these things can be handled at the ballot box, and indeed in several states they were. But I think it's a values issue, and I obviously oppose it.
Thank you. Mr. Clayton, what is the annual budget for the office and employees, and do you think the budget amount allocated for office and staff is the correct amount?
Let's see, I think this year the My budget is for both offices, that's tax, motor vehicle, and DNR, I believe is, and I rarely look at the bottom line budget because I don't control but about 95% or 5% of it. So I think it's around 1.3 million for my office. I control, I think, about $60,000 of that 1.3 million. That's for paper, pens, toner for our printers, that type of thing. Everything else is either wages, benefits, or it's mandated by state or local law that I do, so I don't have any choice but to spend money. So, but that's roughly where it's at. My budget this year is $15,000 less than what it was 8 years ago. And there has been 8 years of constant increases in wages and benefits.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Garby, I'll ask you the second part of that question that he just had. Do you think the budget amount allocated for the office and staff is the correct amount?
Without being there and being the one making the budget, I don't know how I can answer that question. I don't know what it takes to fund the employees or motor vehicle or treasurer's office.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the audience question portion of it. It's because we now each candidate will have 90 seconds for a summation statement. And we will start with Ms. Lee.
I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. I want to say that, yes, I am a lifelong Sioux Cityan. I told you that in the beginning. But I also want to tell you that I am also a consensus builder. I like to work with people. I want to work with people. I think you get more accomplished when you combine your ideas. But I also believe that you have to allow people who are department heads to give you some direction, and we cannot micromanage everything. We need to monitor it because we, as elected officials, are the ones that are held ultimately responsible for any decisions. And we need to know that, and we need to hold people accountable also. But yet we need to allow those folks to do their jobs. We have talked about many issues tonight. We've talked about taxes, and we always want to keep taxes as low as possible. We also want quality services, and we also have to keep in mind when we say levy, levy is a 4-letter word for tax. So let's not kid ourselves. Somewhere along down the line, we're going to pay for that. Because if we go in, when we go into Rolling Hills, even though we can raise the levy is going to be can be raised and will be raised up to $40 or more per capita. So we need to keep that in mind. And also we need to also hold people responsible. It's not the county's responsibility to make sure the largest mental health provider is billing Medicaid or Medicare. That is their responsibility, their CEO's responsibility. So I'm saying to you, if you want someone with common sense, someone who listens, someone who take an approach and do research and their homework, vote for Flora Lee on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
Thank you very much. I think there's going to be a great contrast this election. Your taxes were raised 5 different times over a decade on the school board. Look at the Department of Management under my opponent. Taxes were lowered the last 4 years. 4 years in a row, that's a record. And we've since fallen from second highest in a 27 county, 100-mile radius to 8th, and we're gonna keep going. We have done the things like ask our department heads, what can you live without? And built consensus with them, and it sometimes had to increase their budgets in some areas, while overall lowering the overall tax effect to you, your family, and our business community. I believe I'm a consensus builder. I believe that's why prominent Democrats like my dad and Mark Monson and the labor community, the sheriff's deputies and correctional officers have endorsed me in this race. I believe I'm one to bridge the aisle and to work with others, whether it's on mental health issues and bridging that gap, or to really put high quality services at the front of every decision. I'm very passionate about meeting in our rural communities, about being in forums like this and listening and hearing from constituents what their needs are. And so I really look forward to the work that we have left to do. I believe it's important work, and I believe it's work that affects people's lives, from veterans to emergency services to folks in the rural community, as well as folks right here in Sioux City, a community that I love and I came back to raise my family. So I appreciate your support on November 6th, or if you want to vote early, I'd appreciate that too.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out to attend tonight's event. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting and Western Iowa Tech for having such a great space to do things like this in. One thing that I'd like to start out with, there had been some, back and forth earlier about legal costs and, the different numbers that are being thrown around. The $100,000 that I referenced earlier, $73,000 of that had to do with legal fees for discrimination lawsuits that are current or ongoing with the county. The other portion of that had to do with our decision to go from Sioux Rivers to Rolling Hills. The state told us back in 2016 that we could not be a standalone county, so the legal fees that we incurred during that time period trying to fight that are maybe could have avoided by listening to the state. I think with this year's election we have a lot of decisions to make, and the most important thing is, like Jeremy said, bipartisan work and working across the aisle and working to serve the people of the county and make sure we set personal agendas aside. And with that, I think that we need to make sure, that we vote with our values and what we pride ourselves of here in Woodbury County, which is being a diverse community that has both rural and urban, and using that to maximize ourselves to the next level and be a leader, not only in Northwest Iowa, but across the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ung?
I want to thank the League, and I also want to thank you, Carter, for a respectful forum tonight. I started out sitting next to one of the longest tenured supervisors in Iowa, and now I'm the longest tenured supervisor on the board. The voters demanded a complete reset of the Board of Supervisors, and they got it. But my path wasn't a sure thing, and I broke the eggs necessary to make the omelet. Primarying an incumbent, voting in a supervisor from the opposite party chairman, standing up for your faith in a relativistic world, and holding people accountable even if it means losing the friends you made at the beginning. When I was chairman last year, we were the most inexperienced board in many, many decades by tenure. But that year, the board set aside an unprecedented $500,000 to the reserves to negate future tax increases, and we led a fair and rigorous interview process to hire 3 new departmental directors, evidenced by unanimous board support. These directors now meet monthly, by the way. Overall, this board has fulfilled the mandate set for it by the voters in 2014 and 2016, and I don't take it for granted. Over 4 years and approximately 200 weekly board meetings, I've only missed one, and it was to lobby for the county's rural interests in DC. Let me be honest with you. In my last election, it was after a particularly dirty campaign. It brought immense vindication for me to win despite every single organization that endorsing against me. Why? To not owe anyone and not be in anyone's pocket is a wonderful thing. Then as now, the grassroots alone elected me, and I'm grateful to you. Then as now, I'll work with anyone to do right and no one to do wrong. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you. Mr. Clayton.
Thank you. I want to thank the League of Women Voters, K-WIT and WIT, Western Iowa Tech, for hosting us, and the Sioux City Press Club for asking all of our good questions, and the audience for asking all the good questions. Those good questions you had. Thank you for that. Just a few things over the last 8 years. I'm a big fan of the ISCTA, which is Iowa County State Treasurers Association. We have the best affiliate in the state of Iowa. The treasurers do. These guys will disagree with that. They think the board's affiliate is the best, but I don't agree. Anyway, I worked on the Web Policy Committee. I worked on the Education Committee. I worked on the Board of Directors. I earned my certified treasurer's certificate. Got my certified treasurer certification back in 2014. Was recertified again 3 years later. In the past 2 years, we combined the tax and the motor vehicle office. We've eliminated 1 deputy and 1 clerk. Last year's budget to this year's budget, I saved $95,000 by that. We've cross-trained almost everybody in the office. We're going in the right direction. We want to keep going in the right direction. I would encourage everybody to use as much of the online service as they can. It's a good service, and it works well 24/7. It's been an honor to serve as your treasurer for the last 8 years, and I humbly ask for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Garvey.
I'd like to thank everybody for making this happen tonight, everyone that's involved, including the people in the audience. I am originally from Sioux City, born and raised here, East High graduate, and like I said before, I was 25.5 years with the Sioux City Assessor's Office. If I'm elected to be the Woodbury County Treasurer, I want to make sure there's equal opportunity for the employees in that office. I want to make sure that the security is there for those employees. I want to make sure that there's signage for everybody that comes into that office so that they know where they're going, that motor vehicle is where it is and treasurer's office is where it is. If they need more seating for the people to be sitting there, I want to make sure that that's available for those people. Being able to drive up to the drive-up and use that to pay your taxes is also an issue that I want to make sure that they can use and make sure that they get a receipt from that window. Make sure that the HIPAA law is enforced in this office, and make sure that all the employees are knowledgeable on every issue in that office, whether it be motor vehicle or the treasurer's office. And like I said before, if there's any questions there that can't be answered at the time, I will get the answer for them and make sure that they don't go away without an answer. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Sioux City and Western Iowa Tech Community College, I would like to thank our audience for attending tonight's forum. We appreciate the debate team members for acting as our timers this evening. I'd also like to thank WIT for working with us to arrange for the YouTube live streaming of this event. Above all, we wish to thank our candidates for their cooperation and commitment to public service, and please give them a round of applause. Please join us on Thursday of this week, October 11th, again at 7 o'clock in this same room, for the candidate forum for the state offices of Senate and House of Representatives. It will be the same format as we did this evening. And I would like to remind you that the election will take place Tuesday, November 6th. Polls are open 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Early voting has started in Iowa, and there is information at the entry table about the satellite voting sites. If you have not yet registered to vote, Iowans, based on state law, have the option of same-day voter registration at the polling site for the precinct in which they reside. You must show proper Iowa identification with a photo and current address, and may then register and vote at the precinct that same day. If you wish to register to vote by mail, you can pick up a voter registration form at the entry table. The voter pre-registration deadline for Woodbury County office election is Friday, September 26th. We urge those of you in our TV listening audience, or I mean YouTube, who have not yet registered to vote to contact the Woodbury Election Commissioner, Pat Gill, at the Woodbury County Courthouse to register to vote. Should you wish to learn more about League of Women Voter membership, and remember, we're not for women only, and our focus on nonpartisanship and voter and member education on issues facing our nation, state, county, and city, please stop at the League table as you leave to pick up a membership form. Thank you again for your participation this evening, and remember to vote in this and every election. Your vote is a precious gift. Use it wisely on November 6th. This concludes our county candidates forum and debate. Thank you.